Hey guys, it's Jasper, and today I'm going to be reading you another fairy tale from Franz Xaver Von Schönwerth's collection of fairy stories, discovered and put together by Erica Agnesier, and translated into English by Maria Tater. The story I'm going to be reading you today is called 12 Brides, and it reads like a romance and ends like a fairy tale. Tonight I'm going to be drinking a nice, yummy white wine, some barefoot bubbly, because it's summertime and barefoot is yummy. So, as always, pour yourself something lovely to drink, relax, sit down, and enjoy the story. Cheers. "12 Brides. A knight and his wife had many worldly goods, but only one child. When the boy turned 12, his father died, and his mother moved to a castle that was in the middle of a lake. She wanted to mourn her husband in a place cut off from the rest of the world. As the boy grew older, he became more handsome and wise, but he was always pale and somewhat withdrawn. He liked being alone and had chosen a remote bedroom for himself, one that had the most beautiful view of the lake. He loved to look out at the lake and daydream. When he turned 24, his mother tried to persuade him to choose a bride. Life at the castle had become too lonely for her, but he didn't want to marry. One evening, when his mother tried to convince him to change his mind, he leaned mournfully against the window and looked out to see the image of the moon brightly reflected on the water. He imagined the features of the woman he hoped to wed one day. Finally, he grew tired and went to bed. He forgot to close the window. Suddenly, he saw a bright light at the window. He looked up but couldn't make anything out. He was about to go back to sleep when the curtains rustled and a woman with silky hair and transparent gown lay down beside him. The dull light from the moon enabled him to see an indescribably beautiful woman with a pale face next to him. She nestled up next to him, and the night passed with playful games and loving chatter. In the morning, the beautiful woman had vanished, but before she left, she told him that she would return. She had watched him looking out at the lake in the moonlight, and she would have come earlier if he had just left the window open. From then on, the beautiful woman slept by his side every night, and he was completely in love with her. But he had an odd feeling that it was not always the same woman who was sharing the bed with him. He began to press her to show herself by day, for his mother was pleading with him to find a wife. Even if she was poor, he was prepared to marry her. She would always say, "That's just not possible, my dearest. I can't get married in the way you imagine. Let me be your wife by sharing your bed." In the meantime, the young man's mother had been searching for a bride for her stubborn son, but the young woman she found left him cold, and when he fell asleep that night, he could hear the woman sharing his bed sigh. The mother went ahead and set a date for the marriage. The wedding day arrived. On the first day, everyone danced until dawn. On the second day, there was a huge banquet. On the third day, the women all escorted the bride to her husband's bedroom. When they walked in, the curtains at the bed flew in all directions. The bride was frightened. She was supposed to climb into bed first, and she had the feeling that the bed was already occupied. The groom was amused by her nervousness, and he climbed into bed. A mermaid was lying between them. The bride felt a cold breath on her cheeks and moved to the very edge of the bed. This happened every night. The knight thought he was holding his bride in his arms, but the poor woman wasted away and died a virgin before the year was over. The same thing happened to 10 other women whom the mother had chosen for her son. All of them died before a year passed. The 12th bride was clever, and she sought out a witch for advice. From her, she learned that mermaids were responsible for what happened to the wives before her. She could protect herself by refusing to follow her husband to the bedroom on that third night of the wedding celebrations and wait until after the witching hour. She should follow those instructions to save not just herself, but him as well. At midnight, he would tell her that he felt as if something were pushing him into the bedroom, but she would have to be firm and unyielding. At the same time, she must remember to shut tightly the window that looked out onto the lake so that the spirits would not be able to come in. Her husband would feel drawn by mournful sounds and be driven to jump into the water, but he would be protected against that with a charm and with herbs that she would put under the bed. She was also told not to draw the curtains of the bed or to get into bed first. Her husband should do that. She must also keep everything that she had learned secret. Otherwise, her husband would surely fall back under the spell of the mermaids. The third day of the wedding celebrations had arrived. It was midnight, and the groom was more restless than ever. He had an odd premonition. He kept wanting to leave, but his bride held him back until midnight had long passed. Once they were in the bedroom, he opened the curtains. 12 sighs could be heard. The bride spoke magical words and prayed with her husband. For 12 years, he had not thought about God. Suddenly, they both heard waves roaring and strange tunes. The waters in the lake rose and waves hit the window, but victory was theirs, and peace reigned forever afterward. I remember the first time I read this story, I honestly believed that it was a romance between this lonely prince and this mermaid spirit woman, and I was so horrified to find out that I was wrong. Even up to, the brides that dying and the 12th bride who seeks out the help of a witch, I was kind of like, well, she's like, a bad one. She really doesn't love the prince like this mermaid does. And I was like, no, she's killing all these brides. And it's not the same mermaid. They're different mermaids, and they're sucking the life out of them, and they're probably sucking the life out of him. And it's not a romance at all, Jasper. Why did you think it was a romance? But that's what I thought the first time I read the story, and I was like, oh, well, that was a classic fairy tale, just, romance. Psych! Just kidding. You got pranked. You got fairy tale pranked. It wasn't a romance. It's a horror story. All of these fairy tales, if you've never read this collection, I have to suggest you pick one up. If you lived near me, I would lend it to you gladly. I own 2 copies and I have 1 lent out. You always have a few copies of the ones you really like because you lend it out and then you want a copy for yourself to read. But all of these fairy tales in this collection, they would make fantastic books, like full-length stories, books or films, to stretch these narratives out. I love the image of this recently widowed queen, and she moves her and her son, in her time of mourning, to this isolated place, to this palace surrounded by a lake, and there's something very enchanting about it. And I think this is where I got the idea that it was going to be a romance. But there's something very enchanting about this image. And then you have this son who grows up in his mother's sorrow and, has no desire to marry, except he has this notion of a woman who his mother could never find for him. And he dreams about this woman. And that night, where he really thinks on it, and he is looking out at the lake, he leaves the window open. And again, I was like, romance, like a Peter Pan come through the window. But of course, Peter Pan coming through your window is romantic in the way of wild and fantastic, but not in the way of lovey-dovey, because there's a lot of danger involved with fairy spirits coming in through your window. And so is the case with these mermaids, but what he thinks is one mermaid. And the way the story just slowly develops is really lovely and beautiful. And again, with this collection of stories, the fairy tale genre is well served in that it doesn't dwell on the horror of the incidents. It makes very light of the fact that you have these women who are dying, it doesn't explain how is it the mermaids are killing them, except that they seem to be sucking the life out of them. They just get so cold, they die. And that the young prince thinks he's holding his new bride, thinks he's, you know, caressing his new bride, but it's not. It's one of these mermaids that lay between them with their cold bodies, breathing cold air onto the bride, all the while, you know, kind of snuggling with the prince. So they're very scary stories, but like the fairy tale genre, it doesn't dwell on the horror of that, but just continues with the details and moves from one front thing to the next. So what I love about this story is just that it is right in line with the fairy tale genre of delivering romance and horror just very calmly and matter-of-factly. I hope you guys enjoyed this story as much as I did. I enjoyed reading it to you. I enjoyed talking about it a little. Again, it's a very short story. There's lots to unpack, but with a one-sided conversation, there's only so much that I can say. And so let's continue the conversation down below. Comment, let me know, what did you think of the story? Were you surprised by the ending, or surprised how the story carried, that the mermaid woman spirit who came up through the window turned out to be, you know, not so much a romantic figure as a life-sucking, slowly killing everyone figure. If there's a particular fairy tale you'd like me to read, let me know what that is. I'd be happy to read something you'd be interested in. Or if there's a particular fairy tale you'd like me to talk more about or read and talk about, let me know what that is. As always, guys, I hope whatever you've been drinking has been good, and that the story and discussion around it has been an equal match. Cheers. Oh, and be sure to close your window tightly, lock it if you can, before you go to sleep tonight, unless you'd like to welcome mermaid-like spirits that'll suck the life out of you and your loved ones. Night night.